Well, hello. Welcome back to A Tale of Three Cabins. We got a little bit of a different episode today. I'm going to kind of go over my arcade machine project that I worked on over the winter. And if you plan on building your own arcade machine, this might be some good, helpful hints for you. I'm not going to go into too great details, but I will tell you what my decisions were, the many different arcade choices you have out there to make, and what mistakes I made too. So come check it out. So I'm all done with the arcade machine, and I thought it'd be a good time to kind of just go back and reflect on exactly how I put it together, what steps I took, what decisions I made, the different types of arcade machines you can build, the different types of electronics that go inside these. And if you are thinking about tackling a project yourself, this would be a good video to check out. It's not going to go into great detail on all the electronics and stuff like that, but it will help you decide which direction to move into. Do you want to build a cabinet yourself? What sort of electronics you want to use on the inside. Quite a few choices on that. Okay, the first thing I would decide is what kind of cabinet do you want to use? Do you want an upright cabinet like the classic arcade styles? To me, those kind of take up a lot of room. They're a little bit more involved when it comes to materials like the MDF board, putting a little header light on the top. It's a little bit tougher, I think, to start out with if it's going to be your first project with an arcade machine. You do a bar top style that's just sits on top of a tabletop or top of a bar, and that's kind of more smaller. It's easily portable to move around, doesn't take up a lot of space. You could do this cocktail version like what I have here. It's great for when you have two players. The screen flips back and forth. Or you don't have to make a cabinet at all. You could just make a control board that's got your joystick mounted in there, a couple switches. You have your electronics underneath this board. You have a video cable going out to your television set. You plug it in your TV when you want to play games, and then unplug it when you're all done. So you don't need a large cabinet to worry about. Now I decided on the cocktail version, which is great for our rental cabin down in Tennessee. I have one down there that I paid full price for. Actually, I paid for two of them because the first one burnt to a crisp when our cabin caught fire. That's another story. So the arcade game is great for a rental cabin. A lot of people like it. We have a pool table down there, but most people make comments on using the arcade machine and how fun it was to play some of the classic arcade games, showing it to their kids compared to what they have now for video games. So it's a big hit down there. And this is kind of reminiscent to when I was a kid in certain pizza parlors and restaurants. You sat down and play on an arcade machine. It's also, I think, probably one of the easier ones to build for your first one. So I went with the cocktail version of an arcade machine. It was kind of pricey to find a cocktail cabinet like the one I have here. You would pay around $450 was about the best price I could find. And then they were usually tacking on another 100 or so for shipping. So just the cabinet itself is going to be close to $550, and that's not including the top, the glass top or plexiglass top. So I thought right there that was kind of pricey. And that always kind of held me back, and I was always looking around for a less expensive option. And I always thought in the back of my mind, maybe I'd try to build one myself. And I thought, maybe I'll take some measurements. I have the one in Tennessee. So I did. Took all the measurements of it, and I thought, well, I could probably refabricate this. It's not going to be exactly the same. It's not going to come together with the type of hardware they use. I'll probably have to figure different ways of fastening the corners and making a cabinet for it. But I think I could probably do it. So I was getting very close to making that decision of just buying the MDF board myself and putting this together. And then I found a company that manufactures the cases, and they happen to be not too far away from my house, about a half hour's drive. And I called them on the phone, and instead of 450 bucks, they manufacture the arcade case or cabinet for $209. And for another 80 bucks, you can get a plexiglass top. So under $300, and I could pick it up. There's no shipping involved. So under $300, I weighed out me buying the MDF board, some of the tools, some of the hardware I'd have to use, and not to mention the time involved. And I had them make the cabinet. I went there, I picked it up. It came in a bunch of pieces. I brought it back here. The instructions to put it together were not the best, but it's not too hard to figure out because I kind of basically knew what this looks like. So I went with purchasing a cabinet, and if you can go that route, that'll save you a lot of time. If you're a little bit more handier with a table saw and some woodworking tools, well, you can design your own cabinet and build it yourself. Here's the hardware, basically like putting together a IKEA bookcase. Now these fasteners come in white and black, and the difference between the white and black is one is like a drop-in when the pin just drops in on it and you turn it and locks it in, and the other one is that you slide it in, and that's probably was one of the most confusing things for me, is where the white and the blacks go. And there was a little bit of trial and error, but if you decide to order one of these and build it yourself, pay particular attention where you're putting these fasteners, because when it comes to, say, dropping the top, you want those to just be drop-in fasteners, and the sides may just slide in to the fastener. So pay attention to that. That was a mistake that I made. Another thing was the pre-drilled holes for the top were misaligned, and I had to remeasure and re-drill them for the pins, and once I did that, it fit okay. I'm going to talk about it more in the video later, but these buttons are more for a Raspberry Pi device, and it's got a little plug on the end. The buttons for the JAMA board only have two terminals on them, and one is a ground. So make sure when you order your materials that you're ordering it for the particular board you're going to use. So when it comes to constructing the cabinet, let me just say a few things. You could put on this T-molding, is what it's called. If you're going to construct your own cabinet, you're going to have to buy a special router bit that puts a kerf. Installing the T-molding is not that difficult. There's YouTubes on doing that too, but basically you're just going to go slow with it. You're going to need a little rubber mallet. When you have an inside corner, you're going to want to just put slices in the T-molding. And then if you have an outside corner, you're going to take out little apple pie wedges going around that corner. And the tighter it is, the more you do of either one. The T-molding comes in multiple colors, and you can use more than one color on a project. I paid about $20 for about 40 feet of this, and I have about 10 feet left over. Not too difficult at all. I used a little rubber mallet, a razor knife, and a cutter that you would use for like PVC pipe. The next thing you're going to want to determine is exactly what kind of electronics you want to go inside here. And there you have a couple different options. There's the Raspberry Pi option, which Raspberry Pi is a small computer. Almost looks like just a circuit board, but it does have USB ports. It does have a monitor or maybe an HDMI out. And they're very popular for arcade machines. That's one version. You might have to find the software to install on the Raspberry Pi, or the ROMs, which are actually the information of the individual games itself. So like you might need a ROM for Space Invaders, a ROM for Burger Time, and you might be able to find one that has a consolidated file of ROMs that's easy to install. The next thing would be computer-based. You know, it might be like a small Linux machine or Windows machine. To me, that really wasn't an option. I didn't want to deal with the computer-based type of system. And then the next one would be JAMA, and that seems to be very popular. And JAMA stands for Japanese Amusement Machine and Marketing Association. And basically, JAMA is probably the most close to the classic arcade machines when it comes to wiring electronics. You'll have a large circuit board on the old arcade games that just contain the game itself. But now JAMA boards today can contain 60 games, 500 games, 1,000 games, 3,000 games on a small board. And to me, JAMA was the way to go, because if something were to happen to that board,
The JAMA board requires a JAMA cable.
And if the board's shorted out, I could just replace the board by plugging it into the cable, or I could add a different board that has more games on it and swap them out. Fairly easy.
So it has all the wiring you need for most basic classic arcade machines. If you want to get into like Birdie King or something that used to have like a trackpad or something of a game a little bit more involved, look on YouTube for more information about that. I didn't want to get too complicated. Most of the time you can get a nice classic arcade machine that just has your joystick and about 3 or 4 buttons on each side. And that'll take care of the majority of the old classic arcade games out there. But like this is 3/4 inch MDF board on the top, and then the sides and the control panels here are 5/8 inch MDF board. So right away you're going to need 2 sheets of that 4x8 sheets. But when you're assembling this or putting it together, it's easier and best to put your buttons in, your joystick in, and pre-wire that before you mount it to the arcade cabinet. I didn't do that. I was underneath on the ground with a flashlight in my hand trying to thread all the little clips and wires in the proper spot, and it was more of a pain. It's doable, but it would be a lot easier if you just took this little panel out, put all the wires on there, and then mounted it to the arcade machine. So that's one tip.
So one of the first things I ordered was a JAMA board, and that basically is just a small circuit board, and it contains 60 arcade games on there, classic arcade games, a lot of your favorites. So it's got Asteroids, Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, Burger Time. There are some that I've never heard of, some I think that are just filler thrown in there, but there's Galaxian, Galaga, a lot of decent games are put on there. So you have your board. Now you're going to need a cable that's going to connect to that board, and that is going to have wires that come out of it. And if you get a decent JAMA cable, and they're pretty much standard, get JAMA cables that have a label on them that actually have a name for what each wire does on that socket that you're going to be plugging into the board. So it'll say joystick left, player 1, player 2, joystick right. So you know exactly where to take your wiring. You need a power supply, and the power supply basically will supply the power for the board. And the way I wired the monitor is I cut the plug off of the AC cord. I found out which one was the positive and negative, and a lot of them are colored, so if you got a white and you got a green and a black, you're pretty good to go. And on the power supply, that also takes the incoming power from my sidewall plug adapter here onto the power supply. So when you switch the game on, the monitor comes on along with the JAMA board and boots right up. Now the monitor has changed drastically since back in the day. Back in the day they had large tubes. Your current classic arcade games can use LCD monitors, and LCD monitors are pretty cheap to find. You can buy monitors that say that they're designed for arcade machines, and they're about $200 a pop, and that's pretty pricey. I found a Dell monitor refurbished, and I'm kicking myself because we used to recycle these things all the time when I was at work. 19-inch monitors, they were a dime a dozen. But anyways, online for about $30, I got a refurbished Dell 19-inch monitor. Came with the RGB cable, which is the connection I'm using on my JAMA, and the power cable. I stripped the power cable, took off the plug, and just screwed them in with the same terminals as the incoming power supply. So both comes on at the same time when you hit the power switch. Another reason I chose this Dell monitor is that it fit perfectly in the recessed opening of the top, and there was very little modifications. I put those little pads on there just in case the power button stuck up too much, and when it was compressed against the top, I didn't want it affecting switching on or off. When you go out and also buy the rest of the necessities that you're going to need to complete this arcade game, you're going to need your buttons for your player 1 or player 2, fire button, start button, coin advance button. You're going to need joysticks, and basically that can take care of most of your needs for most of these classic arcade games. If you want to get crazy
and do something a little bit more involved. Let's say you're a big fan of Burger King or something like that, and that used to have like a trackpad or a spinning ball on there. That's a little bit more involved, and it can be done, but you're going to have to get certain adapters and change the wiring around a little bit. I started out basically, I wanted to do something that was somewhat simple, and I'm not saying it's totally simple, but it's given me a lot of the classic arcade games with just a joystick and a couple buttons compared to more complicated games that you could get. Once you get these things, make sure that they're JAMA compatible, that they have the right connections on the back, and most JAMA connections do not have a simple plug like this. Basically, they just have terminals that you hook up to. These plug connections are more for a Raspberry Pi, and then all your plug connections will go into a main circuit board, and then from there it goes out to a USB connection on the Raspberry Pi itself. JAMA just looks like a spider web of wires. That's basically the way arcade machines were wired back in the day. The only thing is that the board now houses multiple games on it rather than just one game. The boards are smaller, they don't generate as much heat, and of course they're a lot cheaper. Now, one other nice thing about the JAMA board is if it ever goes bad, you can basically just unplug where this ribbon cable on the JAMA cable would go, put a new board in and plug it back in, and you're good to go. All the power and everything is already going to be established that you set up. So it's pretty easy to replace that board. This one is a little different. It has a plastic case exterior, and it does have some connections on here. You'll see there's an RGB connection on there. HDMI if you're going out to your TV. This one was not much more than the other JAMA board that I purchased that has 60 games on it. This has 2,500 games on it. And there's a lot of like repeats, a lot of like knockoff games, a lot of games I never heard of before on here, but it still has a ton of the old classic arcade games. A few more of the classics than what came on this 60-in-1 board that I have in the arcade machine now. But the nice thing too is if I want to like test this out and see the 2,500 games, I can unplug the board that's in this arcade machine, plug this in its place, boot it back up, and then this board is operating with 2,500 games on it. So your cabinet, your JAMA board, your power supply, your push buttons, your joystick, your monitor, and we're getting pretty close here to almost everything you need. Some other things to consider, and you don't need them, but is a small speaker. And there are connections on the JAMA cable, a negative and a positive, to go to a small, let's say 3-watt speaker, and that's what I purchased. You can get feet, adjustable feet to adjust the balance. My little sidewall power supply, and then this T-molding, which I put on, and it comes in many different colors. I ended up getting about 25 to 30 feet of it, and I have a little bit left over for maybe another project in the future if I decide to build another one. All in all, I think it took me, if I were to string my time together from start to finish, assembling the cabinet and putting everything together, it's about 8 to 10 hours, and maybe, once you get proficient at it, you can make that a little bit quicker. If I add up all the parts, I'm probably somewhere around $530 for everything. If you turn around and look on Facebook Marketplace or try to buy these outright, maybe the cheapest you would be able to find something is about $850, but most of them sell for around $1,000. You can get crazy with graphics. There's a lot of people on Etsy that make decals that you can put on here if you have certain games that you want to highlight on the side walls of the cabinet or on the top here. Graphics for an upright game are going to be much more expensive if you want to fill up the whole side wall of that upright game. And it just depends how you want to lay it out. You could add coin slots to this thing and make it and actually work with coins if you wanted to, if you really want that realistic look, if you want the little red glow of the coin slot underneath, you could do that. All right, well, I'm going to leave links down below for just about everything that I purchased to build my cocktail arcade machine. I appreciate everybody watching. I hope this is going to save you some headaches if you decide to build this little project yourself and decide which direction and path you want to go. And then I might talk in the future about this console right here, which is only around $120 to $150. Gives you about 1,500 games.
and saves you space. It's already made. You just hook it up to a TV if you don't want to go through the hassle of building your own machine. So thanks for everybody watching. Hope you like these videos. Enjoy, subscribe, and keep an eye on us. Take care, everybody.